Okay. So let me. This session should take us about 45 minutes. Okay, shouldn't be too long. Let me start off with a really interesting story I heard from a psychologist a couple of years ago, and this person said that some people are naturally at peace, they're very content, and one psychologist had actually studied such individuals. Here's what he learned. He said, if you can sit quietly after difficult news, and if in financial downturns you remain calm, and if you see your neighbors travel to amazing places and you're not jealous, if you happily eat whatever is put on your plate, and you fall asleep after a day of running around without a drink or a pill, and you can always find contentment just where you are, well, you know what? Chances are you're a dog. And that's because almost no people are like that. Dogs, they're a lot more laid back than most of us. And I include this little slide here for two reasons. One is to just kind of make a point about the fact that if you're experiencing stress, you're certainly not alone. And two, because it's always good to have pictures of dogs. That's been my experience. So let me. I want to talk a little bit about stress, and I want to talk about it from two levels. And I want to start talking about it from the biological side of stress. And I promise, because this is not your main interest, I won't spend too much time on this. It'll take 6 or 7 minutes. But whenever we talk about stress, we are always talking about two elements. We're talking about what is happening to our biology, what's the biological piece of it, and what's happening to us psychologically. So think about this scenario. Imagine a zebra or an antelope is being attacked by a lion. That zebra or antelope needs to get the heck out of there. They need to flee. And the lion's hungry, so the lion needs to run down its prey. And in both those animals, what we call the stress response is activated. And I'm going to describe that response in just a minute. But in the case of both of those animals, this stress response is highly adaptive. As we'll see in a moment, it's not always adaptive for humans, but it is in this circumstance for animals. Now, we can activate the same stress response, biological stress response, due to either short-term stress or more chronic psychological stress, kind of stuff that we deal with every day. And although that stress response, that biological stress response, which I'm going to describe, is adaptive for the lion and the zebra, for those of us who experience chronic stress, we're not facing an immediate emergency, we tend to pay a price when that biological stress response occurs. And again, I want to emphasize, if you're feeling stressed, there is a biological stress response. That biological stress response involves two different systems. You'll remember these systems from high school biology. One is called our autonomic nervous system, and one part of that is called the sympathetic nervous system, another part's called the parasympathetic. You don't need to know this stuff, but the sympathetic nervous system is the part of our nervous system that controls our stress response. But the other main biological piece that's involved in our stress response is hormones. These kind of chemical messengers that can be sent from a brain cell or from cells throughout the body and transported quickly out the body, across the body, and they're bloodborne. And the main ones we know about are adrenaline, which is often called epinephrine, the exact same thing, just using different terms, and something called glucocorticoids, and we'll mention those. Those are really big ones, and they're both hormones that are involved in this stress response. Okay, so and as a quick reminder of stuff, we've got three parts in our brain. They kind of evolved at different times in the evolution of humans. The oldest of those in our evolutionary history is the brainstem, and secondly, what's called the hypothalamus, which is very much involved in sending out these stress hormones. The second is called the limbic system. That's actually not a place in the brain. It's a system. It's a network of stuff that's very much involved in controlling our emotions. And then the third, by far the most recent of our evolved parts of our nervous system, is the cortex. That's the upper level of our brains, the outer level of the brain, right? And that's involved in higher order thought processes. So here's the way the stress response works really quickly. For some reason, you're feeling threatened. You're feeling worried. And as soon as that happens, cells in your liver begin to release glucose, that's sugar, okay, into your bloodstream. And that increases the amount of blood sugar and energy that's available to your body, which, as you could see, if you're being chased by somebody, that's a really good thing to have. And I won't go through exactly how that happens, but if you want to read these slides, you can do that. And the ultimate end of that is that it moves energy as this glucose is being released. It moves energy from where it had been stored in the form of glucose throughout our body, especially to exercising muscles, which is really important, again, if you're being chased by a lion, but not so much if you're sitting in your living room worried. The cumulative effect of this is that our blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing all increase. There's an upside to all of that. It does help us prepare to flee, to move quickly. It accelerates the delivery of nutrients to where they're needed in the body, especially to our larger muscle groups. Those things include oxygen and glucose again. And some other kind of side things that are important. Our perceptions of pain get a bit blunted, physical pain. We clot wounds better. You can see how all this stuff is really useful if you're actually being chased. But there are a number of downsides, and these downsides really hit us when we're worried and we're anxious, we're concerned, but we're not actually being chased. And what happens is blood is diverted away from parts of our body that don't seem to need it at the moment, like our gut or our reproductive organs. The blood vessels in our digestive tract constrict. Longer-term needs like our growth and tissue repair and reproduction and digestion, they're all inhibited because your body just wants to do what it needs to do to be able to flee. This is what everybody calls the fight or flight response. Our adrenal glands begin to release hormones as well. They're sitting on top of our kidneys, in case you don't remember where your adrenal glands are. That's a quick drawing of them. And there's this kind of really amazing connection in our body between our hypothalamus, it's kind of sitting on the bottom of our brain, our pituitary gland, which sits right below the hypothalamus, and our adrenal glands. And all of them are involved. All of them are involved in these biological stress responses. Okay? People call it the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. They're all involved. They're all interconnected. And they regulate lots of our body processes. Digestion, our immune system, we're going to come back to that. That's a big one. Our mood, our emotions, our sexuality, the way we store energy, the way we spend energy, etc. All that happens with our HPA axis. And ultimately, as we experience this stress response, we have various parts of our body that begin to release what are called glucocorticoids. Okay. The best known of those is probably called, to most of us, is adrenaline. So we get pretty worked up. And then finally, there's another really important stress hormone. Again, I won't go into all the details here. It's called cortisol. And when people study stress, when biologists or physicians study stress, they most frequently focus on our level of cortisol. Because if you have a high level of cortisol, you're experiencing stress, even though you might not be thinking you're experiencing stress. And this cortisol can be helpful, carried by the blood, and it triggers. It's what triggers the release of blood sugar ultimately throughout our system. But I want you to note this, especially when it happens for sustained periods of time. Cortisol suppresses our immune system, and hence makes us much more likely to become ill. Yeah? That's really important. It does a number of positive things, again, if you're really facing stress, but when we're facing chronic stress, that's not a good thing. So let's move away from the biological part of stress and talk about the psychology of stress here. And I want to begin by emphasizing this point. And to me, one of the goals of tonight's session is that there are 4 or 5 major takeaways from this chapter and this module that we're dealing with. This is the first one. I can't overstate this enough. It is not events that cause stress. It's what we think of events that cause stress. In other words, whatever we're facing, okay, at any one moment, whatever we're thinking about, it's how we're thinking about it that determines the level of stress, including biological stress that we're experiencing. If it was events that directly cause stress, all of us would respond with the same level of stress to the same event, but that's not even remotely true. It's the way we're interpreting, the way we're thinking about the event that determines the amount of stress that we experience. I'll come back to that point in a bit. Again, there are 2 kinds of stress that we experience. There's acute stress. If you've ever been in a car accident, you've experienced that, or that panic you feel, or you think you just lost your wallet, right? And so we all experience acute stress occasionally, but the stress that really gets us is chronic stress. That's really what our main focus is here in this chapter. It's the kind of stress that's almost lurking in the background, almost always there. Most animals don't experience much chronic stress. Dogs don't. Lions don't. Gazelles don't. Zebras don't. But humans do. So why do we experience this chronic stress? Because ultimately, we're in an environment now that is really different than the environment we evolved in. And the things that cause us chronic stress are relatively recent in our historic and evolutionary development. Examples include being in that lousy traffic jam every morning, our computer crashing, constant noise in the background, worried about finances, worried about the stock market, long lines in the grocery store, and working in a world where we don't know whether the investments and the energy that we're putting out now will ultimately pay off. Well, that is what psychologists call a delayed return environment. We simply don't know what's going to pay off and how much it's going to pay off. It takes a while to know that. That's generally not the case with many animals. The feedback is quick. Again, when the zebra is chasing when the lion is chasing the zebra, both of them aren't in a delayed return environment. Either the lion gets the zebra or the zebra gets away. Either way, they both get feedback. They get kind of fairly immediate return on what's going on. And almost all humans until about 10,000 years ago, when agriculture was first developed, lived in an environment of immediate returns. But that's not the way we are now. So many of the problems that we face, we can't figure out how to solve them. In fact, we can't solve them. So classic examples: money. Do we have enough? What if the car breaks down? Am I saving enough for retirement? How about our personal relationships? How am I getting along with friends, my spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, family members, coworkers, people at work? How about work? What's work like? Most polls show that about half of people are fairly engaged and happy at work, and that causes us to worry. How about our health? Major, minor illnesses, stress-related illnesses, things that we have to worry about that might occur in the future. I'm somebody who messed up my knee, I don't know how, about 14 months ago. There's a pretty good chance that I'm going to need to get a new knee in around the May-June timeframe. Not sure yet, but it's looking that way. And that's something that's not happening to me now, right? Although my knee hurts all the time. But that idea of getting a new knee, I worry about it all the time. That's called chronic stress, even though there's nothing I can do about it right now. And there's tons of daily hassles and things that irritate us. All of those things cause us chronic stress. A lot of people have estimated, physicians, medical doctors have estimated that about 80% of visits to doctors in the developed world are for disorders that are either caused by or made worse by stress. These are just some examples of them, right? Chronic back pain, neck pain. If you know anything about back pain, you know that is very much worsened by stress. Headaches, gastrointestinal pain, insomnia, having trouble sleeping, problems with sexual functioning, anxiety, depression. Stress is not the only cause of these things, but it can certainly cause them or make them worse. And when we're a manager and we're experiencing stress, we have a whole bunch of problems. All the research suggests that managers who are experiencing stress, they don't kind of adequately attend to their environments. They tend to focus only on the information in their environment that confirms their initial expectation. They get focused on one approach to solving the problem. They're not good at thinking about different and alternative approaches. They kind of tend to adopt a short-term crisis mentality. They don't consider the long-term implications of their actions. They consult with others less. They listen less effectively. And they rely on old habits rather than thinking about more creative ways and unique solutions. These things have been shown to matter around the globe. Studies all around the globe, 142 countries in one study, 150,000 participants. Both positive and negative emotions are affecting our self-reported health, and they count for almost half of the variability in health of people around the world. This is really stunning. So with that all said, here's the basic model that your textbook uses. This is a wonderful model. It's one of the reasons why I really like your text. It says basically, look at there are kind of 4 different kinds of stressors. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. Those stressors might cause us, depending on how we're thinking about things. Remember, it's not events, it's how we think about events that cause stress. But they might cause us to have a physiological stress reaction and a psychological stress reaction. But that'll get minimized if we figure out ways to become resilient. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that in the remaining 20-25 minutes we've got. So again, we have these consequences of stress. One of the biggest of which, again, as I said earlier, is our weakened immune response. So we become ill. And again, not because the stress causes the illness, but the stress damages our immune system. Our immune system is usually good at fighting off illnesses, but now it's not. And so everything from viral infection to coronary diseases, etc., we experience those kinds of things. And we experience burnout. And that's one of the surveys you need to be completing for this week's work, and that you'll be writing about in the skills analysis paper. So let me just briefly place something about job burnout in context here. Rather than just thinking about burnout as something that stands alone, it's better to think about it as part of a continuum. If we're burned out, we're exhausted at work. Maybe emotionally exhausted, maybe physically exhausted, but certainly emotionally exhausted. That sense of, damn it, I'm at the end of my rope, I can't take this anymore. The opposite of that would be to be energized by your work, to really be engaged. You know, you wake up in the morning and you want to go to work. You're excited. If you're experiencing burnout, you're experiencing cynicism. This cynicism is often about other people that you interact with. So we tend to distance ourselves from others. Our conversations become shorter. We interact with people less frequently. But on the other end of the continuum, we're involved. We really like being around people. We like interacting with people. And we're personally involved and engaged with people. And the third component is called inefficacy. This is the sense that I'm working hard, but I'm not getting anything done. I'm just feeling like I'm not accomplishing what I want to accomplish here. And that's a classic sign of burnout, that feeling like you're a hamster on one of those damn little wheels where they run around and run and run and run, run and run and run and run and run, but they never get any place. And some of you might have jobs where you're feeling that way right now. But the other end of that continuum is efficacy, that sense that I am accomplishing things. I'm doing good work. I'm doing something meaningful. And all of us at times experience burnout. Burnout is not a personal characteristic, but it is something that we all experience at times. And when we do that, we experience exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. What we want to move to is this sense of energy, involvement, and efficacy, this sense of engagement at work. So and when we're feeling burned out, we have a lot of these kind of symptoms that are related to stress again. More headaches, more stomach problems, hypertension, that's high blood pressure, more cold, more flu, more disturbances in our sleep. We find it harder to sleep, harder to get to sleep. We wake up in the middle of the night. We wake up too early in the morning. We feel tension in our muscles. Sometimes you don't even notice the tension in your muscles. I've trained myself to do this, but many people have amazing tension in their neck and shoulder muscles, and they don't even notice it until somebody else points it out to them. We become less satisfied with our work, less committed to the organization we work for, more likely to be absent, more likely to quit. Among nurses, nurses tend to lower their level of patient care when they're experiencing burnout. Police tend to be more aggressive towards civilians when they're experiencing burnout. And that's what many of us experience when we're facing burnout, which is a spillover effect. So if the burnout is at work, we have the spillover effect where it begins to affect our family, our marriage, or whatever, our personal lives. So how might we cope with stress? And again, the book does a nice job here. It says there's 3 basic things you could try to do. You could try to eliminate stressors. That's the first one I'm going to talk about. To not have things in the environment that might cause you stress. You can try to do that, and you might be able to eliminate some stressors. But you can never eliminate all stressors. You can be more proactive, and you can try to develop resiliency. That's the big thing I'm going to be focusing on in the remaining 20 or so minutes we've got. And the final thing is coping mechanisms. Those are in the short run. Now that I'm feeling really overwhelmed, how can I cope with this? That's usually the least effective approach. It's not like a bad thing to know coping mechanisms, but you don't want to get to the point where you're always having to use coping mechanisms, because if you can diminish and reduce the number of stressors you're experiencing in your life, and you can develop resiliency to stress, then you don't need coping mechanisms very much. Okay, so what are stressors? Again, it's not events that cause stress, it's what we think of them. So an event is a potential stressor. You know, you're in a traffic jam. For some people, that's a really big stressor. I hate this. I hate this long line. It's making me crazy. Many of you who drive around the Philly area probably experienced that if you commute at rush hour. Those who travel into New York, which is closer to where I live, experience it every day. But you know what? Not everybody experiences stress when they're in a traffic jam. Some people are quite relaxed. They kind of go, well, look at this. Nothing I can do about this. So, you know, this is a good time for me to put on a radio station I like, or maybe listen to some music that I really enjoy, maybe on the radio, or maybe I've got CDs, or I've got some music on my cell phone, or maybe I've got a book on tape, you know, a CD of a book that I can listen to, or I downloaded a book that I can listen to. And this is going to be great. I'm going to have a chance in the middle of this traffic jam to kind of relax and do something really enjoyable. So those people aren't experiencing stress. They're facing a stressor, which is the traffic jam, but they're not experiencing stress because they're thinking about the traffic jam differently than other people are. So different kinds of stressors. One is time. Just we have too much to do and too little time to get it done in. This sense of being overloaded with work. Or that one of the toughest kinds of jobs to have is jobs where you don't control your available time. It's interesting that senior managers generally do control their available time. They decide when to meet with people. But if you're working in a call center and the calls just come into you, you don't get to control when the call arrives. You don't get to control who's on the other end of the call. You don't get to control how angry they are. And that's that lack of control. And lack of control over your own time is a major stressor. And for many people, that leads them to experience considerable stress. Another form of stressor, our second out of 4, is called an encounter stressor. These are the kinds where we're just dealing with people who we have conflict with. Sometimes at work, we have conflict with somebody not because of them personally, but because they have a job that is by definition in conflict with our job. You know, you're in sales and marketing. You're looking for more resources to drive your marketing and sales efforts, but you're currently interacting with somebody from finance who's telling you that we don't have a budget for that. And this creates a conflict between your two roles. Or you just have a conflict between colleagues at work where you disagree about how to handle a problem. Or sometimes we have interpersonal conflicts, which are just people who drive us nuts. I'm lucky to work at LaSalle. I've been there a long time, as I said in my video that I hope you've all watched. But you know, one of the great things about LaSalle is interpersonal conflicts have been rare over 25 years. That said, they occasionally exist. And I can only think at the moment maybe of 4 or 5 people in the School of Business who I've ever had an interpersonal conflict with. That's over a very long period of time. But that's a type of stressor. Another type of stressor is a situational stressor. And one of the biggest ones for many of you might be working someplace where there's a lot of rapid change going on. Technology is changing, people are changing, people are leaving, people are getting hired. There's a merger, there's an acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are potential situational stressors. Some people welcome them and they love them, but most people don't like change. And therefore they experience that kind of change as something that causes stress. But there are some people who don't. They experience these kinds of rapid changes in the workplace as something that's exhilarating and exciting and fun. Again, it's not the event, it's what we think of the event. And sometimes we just work in really lousy working conditions. I worked many, many years ago when I was in my early 20s, very briefly for less than a year, in a factory very near Newark Airport. And it was just a toxic place to work. Literally, the air was so bad that there were evenings when you felt like you were going to get sick to your stomach. And when I came very close to doing it. And I was not alone. So again, that's another example of a situational stressor. And then the final one, and I'll bet you that every one of you has experienced this, are what are called anticipatory stressors. That's something that hasn't happened. It might not happen, but you're worried about it. Maybe it will happen. What will I do if it does happen? What will it be like? Will I be able to cope with it? The company might be doing some downsizing. Now you're worried all the time. Every damn day you're worried. And you'll be worried for months about it. I'm worried about my damn knee. Those are anticipatory stressors. I don't know. I've heard that the first 2 or 3 weeks after you get a new knee are really not at all good. I've heard that it's great 6 months later. People rave about it, but they say the first few weeks are really nasty. And damn it, I worry about it all the time. That's an anticipatory stressor. What's interesting here is there's no need for us to do this. You could just not worry about it at all until it actually happens. That's not the way we're wired. Again, it's what we're thinking about, not the event itself, that's causing that stress. Now, so here's a little cartoon about time management. You may have experienced this. Damn it, was I supposed to have that done today? I can't believe it. Matter of fact, you may experience that during this short 8-week class we have, because there's something due starting this Sunday. There's something due every week, and right from then until the end. And in a number of weeks, 2 things are due. And sometimes what's due is a major project. You got to be ahead of the game. It's especially true with the skills analysis paper. So here's some of you may have seen this, but here's a way to think about managing time. And this is what I would describe as the second major takeaway of our session and of this module. You could think about any activity that you might undertake and categorize it in terms of how urgent is it. That is, you have a sense that I need to do this now, not later, and how important it is. That is to say, what kind of an impact will it have on me, my coworkers, my family, whatever it is, importance. Note that things that are urgent are often not important, or at least that we think of as being urgent. A classic example of this is looking at our email, or constantly getting alerts from our cell phone and checking them all the time. I can't, it's like, damn, the alert goes off. I have to check. I have to see what that is. What was that? Did somebody text me? Yeah, no, I don't want to wait 5 minutes and find out. I don't want to wait 30 minutes until this meeting's over. I got to check my cell phone right now and find out who's texting me. That's an example of something that's urgent, at least in our minds. We think of it as being urgent, but it's not important. It's really not important. Of course, there are some things that aren't urgent or important, just entertaining escapes. These are not necessarily bad things. Later tonight, I'll probably just kick back and relax for an hour or two. And I'll do that deliberately by doing something that's neither important or urgent. And a good example of that for me at night might be watching Jeopardy or watching reruns of The Big Bang Theory or something. These things aren't important, but they're escapes, they're routines. Right? Sometimes we have things, of course, that are both urgent and important. And we got to deal with them now. They really are crises. They really are the things that require our immediate attention because they're important and because somebody demands that we act on it right now. But I'll tell you the main thing that distinguishes people who are good at time management from those people who don't. Looking at my screen, it's the quadrant labeled 3. These are activities that are not urgent. Nobody's asking you to do these activities right now. You don't have to do them. But they are potentially very important if you do them. All of you are currently doing something in that category at this very moment. You are doing something for an MBA class for a degree that is not urgent. For most of you, this is not an urgent degree. It's something you're doing because you want to do it. There's no real urgency involved, but it is potentially very important. And here's what we know. We know that people who devote a certain amount of their time each week, consistently, week after week, month after month, year after year, who consistently devote time to doing things that are of low urgent but highly important, potentially, those are the people who are managing their time best. And the trick in doing that is you cannot wait until everything else is done. Because if you're constantly focusing on other things, you'll never get to this because it's not urgent. So I congratulate all of you on having done something really smart, which is you're doing something that's not urgent right now. You may have labeled it urgent in your mind, but it's for most of you, it's not urgent. Yet getting this degree, taking these courses, is potentially very important. And setting aside time to do that, week in, week out, that's what distinguishes effective time management from ineffective time management. And the trick again is you have to do it before you do other things. So I'll say this, I'm not a very smart guy, but one of the reasons for my relative success over life in terms of teaching and research and my corporate experience and my consulting experience has been my willingness to do things that do not seem urgent at the moment, yet they're potentially important. And as a result of that, I've gotten a lot of stuff done that many of my colleagues have not gotten done. I have a number of colleagues like me, but I have a number of colleagues who aren't like me. And a lot of it is because other people are focused on not getting to something that's not urgent, but potentially important. All right, let's talk about developing resiliency. Sometimes stress just won't go away, no matter what you do. So how do we develop resiliency? How do we learn how to withstand the negative effects of stress? So I'm going to talk about a few things here. Here's the first one. There's a chart just like this in your textbook. And it gets at the idea of life balance. This is an enormously important concept. Our third major takeaway from this module and tonight's discussion. This wheel shows a variety of different kinds of activities that each of us might participate in. But my hunch is that some of you participate in some of these activities much more than others. And you could envision, you could look at each one of these and you could say, which ones of these am I doing plenty of? I spend plenty of time doing that, versus which ones do you just not get to enough? For years in my life, the work activities and the intellectual activities were really dominant for me. Very few social activities. I was so busy with work and my family that very few social activities. Not too many spiritual activities, but I was good with physical activities. I was good with running, and I was good with walking every day. No more, of course, with the knee. And the biggest thing that was empty in my life was the absence of time devoted to cultural activities. It could be anything. I don't mean high culture, low culture, whatever. It could just be, going to see a concert, going to see a film, going to a museum, whatever it might be, right? And so here's the trick. Here's the big takeaway on this. the more balanced you are in terms of spending time in all of these categories, the less stress you experience and the more resilient you are to stress. So if most of your time is devoted to activities in just 2 or 3 of these slices, that suggests that you don't have a really good life balance, and it makes you non-resilient to stress. But when we experience stress, both psychological and physical, and we have a life that's reasonably balanced across these kinds of activities, then we're pretty resilient to it. The stress doesn't get us. It doesn't do as much damage as it would otherwise, and in fact might do very little damage. So the big takeaway here is not just that piece of knowledge, but that if you want to become more resilient to stress, it's not simply that you're going to figure out a way to manage your time effectively so you'll have more time. That's not the point. Because if you spend the time in the same slices of this chart that you're currently spending it in, you're not doing yourself any good at all. But if, in fact, you're getting this, you're using your time management skills, and what you're doing is you get more chunks of time, right? Just little bits. It doesn't have to be a lot, but you get more chunks of time. You then devote it to slices here in this chart that you're currently not spending much time in. That's a great way to become resilient to stress. And of course, one big way to do that is to plan those activities in advance, often weeks or months in advance. I've gotten to the point in my life with concerts, which is something I love. I love lots of different kinds of music. But I didn't get to go to many concerts. Now I deliberately search for time to go to concerts. And we set those out literally months and months in advance. So I currently have concerts that I'm going to every month for the next 5 months, all the way through May. And again, that helps with that cultural activity slice for me. So that's what life balance is about. A lopsided pattern is not adaptive. Right? If you're feeling stress in one area of your life, devoting more and more time and attention to that one area of your life is often counterproductive. A better way is often to spend more time in slices in that chart that you're not devoting much time to now, by enhancing your life balance. Now, the next one I'm going to skip over here because we're coming to the end. But I do want to say this about Type A personality. You have to complete the Type A personality scale. That is one of the scales that's on Canvas. There is a video about how to interpret it, and you need to be writing about it in your skills analysis paper. But I always say with people who have a Type A personality that you're creating your own stress. That's the amazing thing about Type A behavior. Here's another thing to remember. You could be Type A on one of these 4 dimensions, but not Type A on the others at all. So the more dimensions you're Type A on, the more Type A you are. And unfortunately, Type A personality presents a number of health risks. But the biggest of those risks comes from the tendency of some Type A people to get hostile and anger too quickly. Yeah, huge problem. And a lot of evidence that this kind of chronic sense of anger and frustration and hostility increases cardiac risk, notably as much as smoking in some studies. So Type A personality is a big thing, and if you're saying I'm Type A, I can't change it, yes, you can. I used to be very high on Type A in terms of impatience and urgency. I am not now. And it took me, I'm not saying I did it in a week or 2 weeks. It was a pattern of devoting myself to learning ways to think about situations differently, and I become much less impatient. All right. So we're kind of getting to the end here, and I want to wrap it up with these last 3 minutes. I promise you we try to be about 45 minutes, and that's where we're going to wind up. I want to tell you a story that some of you may know about, or you may have heard another version of it. And I've always referred to it as the story of the rocks and the mason jar. So I bet you some of you have heard this story. I don't know if this story is apocryphal or true, I don't know, but it's a great story. So in case you don't know what a mason jar looks like the jar here in the slide. Imagine you had a really big mason jar. So here's how I heard the story. Ivy League MBA program, bunch of students in a skills class. A special guest speaker comes in to talk about managing time. And of course, you can imagine what Ivy League MBA is like. Not all Ivy League schools, by the way, have MBA programs, but those that do, like Wharton and Harvard, Cornell, etc., Columbia, very, very competitive to get into. The students tend to be very competitive. You have to have a minimum generally of 5 to 7 years of full-time work experience, 5 to 7 years of impressive full-time work experience. You have to score very high on the GMATs. Most people score 750 or above on the GMATs. And the work is very demanding. So time management is a challenge for them. So this consultant comes in, he's got a big box, and he takes out the mason jar. It's a big mason jar, not a little mason jar. And he starts to take out from his big box, the students can't see this, he starts to take out some rocks, some kind of big chunky rocks, and he starts putting them in the mason jar. You can envision what that would look like. And eventually it's clear he can't get any more of these big rocks into the mason jar, big jagged kind of rocks. And he says to the students, do you think I can get anything else in there? And they say, well, I don't think so. And he kind of smiles, and then he takes out some smaller kind of pebbles, and he starts putting those in. They kind of fall through the crevices and fill up the jar around the big jagged rocks. And then he says, think I can get anything else in there? Of course, these are Ivy League students, so they're pretty smart. So they get, oh, it's a game. I get it. I see. And they say, oh, yeah, probably. And so he says, oh, yeah, you're right. So then he takes out a bag of very fine-grained sand, and he starts pouring the sand into the jar. And of course, the jar is now filling up with sand around those kinds of pebbles and around the big jagged rocks. And he says anything else, and by now people are laughing. And sure enough, he takes out a big jug of water, and he starts pouring the water in. And of course, the water starts pouring in and getting soaked up by the sand, and eventually overflows. And he says, what do you think the point of this story is? How do you think what's it about? What's that have to do with time management? And this one really smart student says, well, your first inclination is to think, you're doing as much as you can, and there's really nothing more you can do. But if you're better at time management, you can get more done. So there's always more that you can get done. And that was the conclusion. A number of students agreed with that. And the consultant said, actually, that's not the point. Here's the point. And by the way, folks, this is the last big takeaway. Here's the point. You got to put the big rocks in first. In other words, if you put the pebbles and the sand and the water in first, you can't get any big rocks in. If you want to get the big rocks done, if you want to do the big things, the things that matter, that are genuinely important, you got to do them first, not after you get everything else done. You got to put the big rocks in first. What are the big rocks for you? Well, big rocks are things that are important but not urgent. Big rocks are slices on that life balance chart that I showed you where you're not doing much right now. But it would be good to just do a bit more. Set some time aside for those things. But you got to do it first. You can't do it last. You can't do it last. And so, again, number one, it's not events that cause stress. It's how we think about events. Number two, try to focus time and activity on things that are important but not urgent. Set aside some time, either each day or each week. Doesn't have to be a lot, but some, to do that. Third, think about the life balance wheel, the life balance chart. Instead of trying to find more time and spending it in the areas where you're already spending your time, stop doing that. Start spending time in areas where you're not spending your time. There are many other great ideas about resilience, etc., in the book. Physical activity, diet, etc., all enormously important. But those are the big activities. In the end, it's the big rocks that matter. So what I want to do here is I just want to do one last thing as we close up. Okay. Let me get to this. And so I want to, I'm going to skip over this one here. And so I'm just asking, really, just take a second, give me some feedback. How would you describe your stress management skills right now? Excellent, good, okay, poor, definitely in need of improvement? Just check a box for me. Get a sense as to where people are at. So I'll just note here that so far nobody has said excellent. Some of you say good, most of you say okay, a few of you say poor, but nobody said excellent. And one thing I'd hope that will happen for you over the course of this semester is that you'll get better at that. I also want to do another, I'm sorry, didn't need to do that. Here we go. Gen pulls. One more second. Just give me one more second here. There we go. Okay, that's incredibly frustrating. I do not want to do that. Over here. And I wanted to get some feedback from you on tonight's session. And relaunch. All right, I did that. I shared the results. That's great. Okay, so here's what I want to do. Let's see. I'm going to give myself one more chance here and see if I can get the poll to pop up. If we can't, we're going to call it a night. Okay? Here we go. Here we go. All right, just give me some quick feedback. In terms of this evening's session being helpful or interesting, would you agree that it was, or strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree? Again, just take a second to do that for me. I'd appreciate that feedback. Let me know. Yeah, well, thanks. It looks like everybody's either in the agree or strongly disagree category, and that's really nice. So nice to hear that. Glad that it was helpful. That's what I'm always shooting for. And we'll have another one of these sessions in a couple of weeks. And please get in touch with me anytime I can be of help. Again, call me, send me a text, whatever, send me an email, get in touch. If I can be of help, love to do it. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Oh, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.